We find Whistler bankrupt, but he actually secures a commission to do a series of engravings of Venice for the London Historical Society. So around 1880, we travel to Venice, and these shows, these images that he makes are extremely successful. He has two good shows, and it's also while he's in Venice that he creates this entire other body of work that was very successful, along with these prints that were done in pastel, kind of observing the atmospheric effects that he found in Venice. And as we know, many of the other Impressionists traveled to Venice. Pretty much all of them actually traveled to Venice at some point. So this is kind of Whistler's take on the conversation. And as I mentioned, he really does this as a printmaking trip to secure. He has a secured commission, and again, these are some of the prints that he would have produced. Again, when we look at this, we have to remember that he's scoring a metal plate, and that's the way he's actually creating this information. And when you look at this, and you look at the way he's able to fill this space, but leave these tremendous open plains that we can think of as the water, it really is quite remarkable how he's treating the surface of this metal plate. Again, he is really a master engraver, and when you look at the history of printmaking, he really is renowned up with some of the larger names. When you look at like Nocturne from 1880, which again is a print, and you look at how he's forming lines in order to form that beautiful ship and San Marco there in the background, and you put that in comparison to one of the paintings he did at the time on 1880, which is Nocturne in Blue and Silver, which is done in oil, we do see a lot of similarities between the two. And again, when we look at these Nocturne paintings that he has continuing forward, we should keep in mind the etching process, and that in some ways it is similar. You're creating these larger atmospheric plots within the surface of the metal plane through the use of the acid actually etching into the metal plate itself. Here's one of the larger prints showing a wonderful scene of the bay, and again, very, very accurate. You can see some of the structures in there. You can see the domo structure actually visible on the left side there, the main court of what we would think of as the downtown area of Venice, if you will, but also giving a certain amount of allusion to the water and also the clouds up above, able to very skillfully create the sensation of atmosphere of these clouds in the sky by really just making a series of somewhat parallel lines to one another descending across the entire area. And again, the ability or the knowledge to leave that much open space is remarkable. Here we have a city scene, and when we look at the complexity of the scene, if we look at the darker areas that he's able to create, and then the phenomenal detail, as in the small child and the person sitting on the right side, all the way up to the window on the left, this is really what makes him such a master printer, is this whole range that he's able to attain within the print itself. He actually stays in Venice much longer than he had first anticipated, but when you look at the work he's producing from this area, it's a little wonder. Again, he was sent there to do the prints, but all of the pastels, all of these wonderful things that we have, the view of St. Mark's and Blue and Gold Nocturne, again, these are kind of additional pieces he produced while he was there, fell in love with the city like so many others did. And again, the water being such a prominent element in Venice, the saturation of colors that you can get is really quite remarkable. When we look at Red and Gold Salute Sunset from 1880, and just the thin outline, if you will, in the background there of the cityscape, again, this looks much like an Impressionist work, but you can also definitely see the influence of Turner and his dealing of atmosphere in something like this as well. Again, it's remarkable to think that we can go from images like that to images like this one, where again we see this precision that is so incredibly remarkable. Looking at the print on the left, and the way he's able to create this wonderful sense of order through the windows and the arcade that's there, the colonnade. You can even tell that they're Corinthian columns to the foreground where we have the canal itself and the boat, and you can even see the ripples on the water. It really is remarkable. We should of course, remember his early training was in the military to do this, but he also spent some time drawing the coast for the U.S. military. And again, when you look at scenes, a lot of the scenes have that feel. A few more of these prints, and I just am so amazed by the image on the left, and again, the amount of dexterity it takes to do something so incredibly precise, but yet have it look as if it was precise at one time. If you look at the grading on all three of those areas, again, this looks like something that has been overgrown, that was maybe built during some time in the Renaissance, and this is what it looks like now. All of these little attributes, when you add them up together, it really does show this remarkable skill that Whistler had in this very, very difficult medium. We return to England and we continue to do portraiture. This is two portraits of Lady Mew from 1881. Again, you'll notice that the face is extremely similar between the two portraits, and really, as much as anything, what Whistler is relying on is the composition itself. Again, I think as we progress here and as we move farther and farther through his career, his interests really do become more about the color and the composition, and very much less about what he actually is capturing. I think he would have been very happy in the 1950s being an abstract expressionist, but again, during the time period that he's living in, he really is kind of starting this foundation. Here we move to a different medium. This is watercolor, and again, just to show the variety and capacity of what he was able to achieve in different mediums. This is quite remarkable in terms of watercolor. I've commented Whistler has a way of kind of painting around a scene in order to develop it rather than directly attacking it. And I think when we look at these two scenes, this becomes very evident. On the one on the right, shelling peas, it's almost as if the entire scene is a little bit more important than the ghostly figure who is barely even visible in the center of the composition. It's as if Whistler is creating everything else but the person, and then the person magically appears. He's also doing these studies, if you will, in these very, very brighter tones. Again, red and black, and also Little Mephisto from 1884 shows how much he's investing in color and really exploring what color can do. Again, if you think of Matisse and the Fauvist movement and some of the work that they're doing, a lot of it, in my mind, has a direct precursor with the room like Little Mephisto from 1884, done by Whistler, really showing what this oversaturation of color really does in the effect of the mood and the presentation of the information. Again, when we look at the white dress on the right, he's going back to that abstract type of pattern. Another person we see pop up in a few of the compositions. Again, this is an amazing watercolor if you look at the details on the couch. We have this character, Millie Finch. She's kind of a mystery in terms of who she was to the artist. She probably was a model and maybe a little bit more than that. Whistler was renowned for having quite a few affairs throughout his career. But again, if we look at the placement of the objects, again, relying on the sense of Orientalism, but again, a lot of this composition is about that red color and the feelings that we get from an inspiration from that. He's using this technique where kind of realistic in the foreground, moving farther back to abstraction. Harmony in Coral and Blue, Millie Finch, 1886. And Harmony at Red Lamplight. Again, this is one of the first times that we see this effect of artificial light on people. If you've seen any of the work of Degas, I've commented on this before in a lecture on him. In Harmony and Red Light, again, this is the first time that artists are exposed to this concept of different colored lighting rather than just regular lighting. When we look at Millie Finch in both of these images, again, from 1886, we can see a certain amount of character and closeness to the artist, but again, not 100% sure who she was or what placement she even has in history. Looking at a few more works from around this time period, again, showing the complexity that Whistler was really able to achieve, both of these being watercolor, the one on the left being a little bit more atmospheric, where you can tell that it's a flower market, but again, a lot of the information that we're registering, we're almost creating ourselves, where on the right it's much thicker and it's much more dense, where he's creating a lot of the information and filling it in directly, creating compositional choices rather than relying on the openness that you might find from watercolor paintings like the one we see on the left. Around 1887, he travels to the Netherlands. And again, just to reiterate this point, I've kind of put these two images together just to show you really the huge amount of variety that Whistler is capable of at this time. We have, again, a drawing or a print that's almost a direct representation of what we're looking at if one were to go to the palaces in Brussels. But then on the left, we have this very, very choppy coast off the Dutch coast where he's leaving large amounts of this area open, but we still get the sensation of this water choppily breaking against perhaps a boat that we're looking out upon. This is really what I enjoy about Whistler. Again, you can tell this is somewhere in the Netherlands. We have quite a few windmills off in the distance. But again, looking at a piece like this and trying to understand why this is so good, a lot of this is what he's not putting into the image. The fact that he's able to create such a vivid scene in front of us with so much of a characteristic in the landscape, where we can see all of these windmills and we can even see perhaps that it's raining with these clouds in the background. But if you actually look at the amount of information he's actually projecting here, the amount that he's actually inscribing on the piece of metal itself, it's incredibly minimal. The economy of line, if you will. So in 1888, very strangely, he has he separates himself from Maud, who he had been with for quite a few years, and he actually marries Beatrix Godwin in 1888. She's a few years younger than he is. She is a widow to the man who was actually the architect of his famous residence, Whistler's White House. They marry each other in 1888. And sadly, within a few years, she becomes very, very ill and has a very, very difficult time towards the end of her life. And again, when you look at kind of this last period of his work, to me, it's very obvious that this darkness, this depression from having to see someone you love go through something like this very much finds its way into his work. When we look at the self-portrait or something as simple as a shop with a balcony, we get this very, very dark feeling from the compositions. And again, not the same darkness you would feel from one of his nocturnes. This is more of an internal darkness that we can see permeating out onto the work itself. Again, this is towards the end of his life, and it has been commented he was very depressed by the passing of Beatrix, and again, having to deal with her and see her in that fashion. Some of the last portraits we have from him, portrait of George Vanderbilt on the right, and the portrait of Charles L. Freer from 1903. Charles Freer is a very important figure in Whistler's work. He is an American collector, and he is also the man that eventually purchases the Peacock Room from the Leyland family in Hull, and he actually has the entire room moved over to America and reinstalled inside one of his mansions. This was actually a tremendous gift to our country, and the nice thing is, because of Charles Freer, you can go and experience the Peacock Room in the United States